Okay. Sorry about that. So welcome to the third breakout session. We're going to be hearing from Mr. William DeMille. In this presentation, William's going to explain how he's created a functioning soil in his vegetable production system by focusing on the 5 spheres found within the soil. He'll define what a functioning soil is and how he's managed to keep it working, and some of the mistakes he's made in the past that's led to destroying to the soil. He gives practical examples and real-life experiences that have worked for him. So if you'd please welcome Mr. William DeMille.
Okay, I'm super happy to be here today. I'm excited about this. I'm just going to share with you part of the journey I've been on in my own soil health world. And just for context of this speech, we run a school in Clover Valley, Nevada, which is northern Nevada. And it's just a business. Me and my partner, we bring people in. Some of them work as interns. Others are students who pay to be there. And so the things that I'm prepared to teach you today are just things that we make sure that all of our students know. Most of what you're going to see here, I have a lot of pictures, but we're just going to show you the way that we do things. So let's go ahead and get started here. For me, can you make this advance on here so I can see it? Thanks. For me, it's no longer a question of whether or not soil health is working, because it simply works. It works really good. So, you know, people watching this presentation that I'm doing right here, this is kind of a mid to high level presentation on soil health. And as I've been doing soil health, it works, and it works perfect. So I'm not trying to convince anybody in this presentation at all. No, it's not working. But we'll just get going here on what is a functioning soil, okay? So we're going to define the soil and how it functions. Functioning soils, they hold water, okay? And the roots are able to penetrate really good into a functioning soil. If you have hard compaction layers, obviously those things are not functioning. And if you can go out there and just pull up your potatoes and carrots and stuff right out of the ground, then there's a good chance your soil is functioning good. And sometimes it can take a long time for that to happen, but we want to be able to have a soil that's like that. You know, a lot of times people will be farming in sand or something. It doesn't, just because you can pull a carrot out without digging it, it doesn't mean your soil's functioning. But when a soil is functioning, you can pretty much have any soil type, and you can go out there with your root vegetables, and you're able to pull those up, and they're working, you know, I mean, they'll come right out of the soil because it's so spongy and beautiful. Some other things about the soil, to be able to define this soil, is that it's full of beneficial microbes, like lots of them. Sometimes when we do a soil sample, a soil test, we'll say, oh man, we're doing really good. There's 10,000 species of microbes in there. That is not a functioning soil. You should have hundreds of thousands, millions of species in that soil. So you should be able to have high levels of carbon in the soil. When we do those tests, those levels of carbon should be very, very high. The carbon will be feeding the plants, because that's what a soil does, is it feeds the plants. Yet in a lot of modern agriculture, if we don't add fertilizer, the plants look like they're dying and they're deprived and they're not growing at all. But so, you know, we need to start shifting our minds to what that soil actually is when it's functioning. Plants will grow to their genetic capacity. I think in agriculture we're used to what plants look like, and in a lot of agriculture we see plants that simply we don't know what they're doing. We think something's wrong if they're in a functioning soil, because they look bigger, they're beautiful, they're more wonderful. We don't know what's going on. They don't even look like the right species. We look in a book to identify a particular species, and we're like, we don't even know what this is. What is this plant? Well, that's a plant that's growing, in a functioning soil, so it's expressing its genetic capacity in a really beautiful way. The environment should be noisy. When you're out there in your field or in your garden, you should be hearing things. You should hear insects, bees, hummingbirds. It should be full of all kinds of life besides just a bunch of plants. There should be an entire functioning ecosystem. If you don't have a functioning ecosystem above ground and you're not hearing it, your soil is not working right. Something's wrong, okay? Here's a picture of an alfalfa plant, a leaf. How many of you are familiar with alfalfa and the size of an alfalfa leaf? This is obviously something's wrong. I mean, it's way too big. What is happening? Well, what happened is my friend Josh Adams has now a hay farm, and he has a functioning soil. And he does take all of his hay off, and so he puts a lot of things back in. But what he's putting back in is supporting the microbial life. And when you dig down in his soil, it's a beautiful, wonderful soil. So he's not at the point with ecology where it's just working and he's taking a portion of the harvest, because he does take all of the hay off, multiple cuttings throughout the year. And we know if we do that, we will degrade the soils. But he's putting things back in. He's using compost teas, compost extracts, minerals, fish hydrolysate. So he's putting a lot back in, but it is feeding that soil. The soil is alive, it is thriving, and it is beautiful. And look at what the alfalfa has done. We take a group of students out there to identify plants. They're not going to identify this one with the books that we have that talk about the size of plants, because they talk about the size of an alfalfa leaf being very different, the size of my small fingernail, right? Not that. Not the size of a giant red clover leaf or a small fava bean leaf, okay? But this is what plants can do and should be doing. They should be expressing the fullest of their genetic capacity. So we need to realize what stops the soil from functioning. And there's two camps here. There's the camp of what stops it in nature, and then what stops it in agriculture. In agriculture, it's our management. If the soil isn't functioning, it's our fault. It's my fault as a producer. I'm doing something wrong. In nature, it's catastrophe. It's just nature, okay? Floods, forest fires, volcanoes. Think of Hawaii for a minute. It's forming new land all the time. There's acres being formed all the time on those islands because the lava flow just is always coming out. And so that is a very early succession. And then what's the first thing that grows on the rock? Well, nothing for a while, but eventually you get mosses and lichens, all that stuff starts growing on there. Later on, when you go further into the island, you have these old growth jungles of these amazing trees and things that are growing there. So we see all the different successions of ecology growing in a place like Alaska. Think of the redwoods in California. That's an old growth forest. That's a forest that has been basically in the same ecological state for we don't even know how long, thousands of years though, because there's 2,000-year-old trees there, right? So why hasn't that changed? Well, there hasn't been an asteroid that hit it and changed it. So these are the types of things we want to emulate and to mimic in our own vegetable systems. So we need to understand ecology and see what ecology is doing. I put this thing on the bottom here about wild herds with no predators. That's an ecological disaster also. There's a big problem in Nevada right now, which is where I'm from, with the wild horse herds. There's too many of them. And they eat all the grass away. And then when the mule deer migrate from the mountains, up in the Humboldt Mountains, they go down into the winter range, and the mule deer herds are plummeting. They're going down, down, down. And so the government people working in those industries are having to figure out what to do. But that's just an example of ecology that's not in balance. It's not working very well. So what do we do in our own management, that is ruining the soil? And it could be a million things. I just put a few things on here. But the interesting one here that I get questions about is undergrazing. Who has an undergrazing problem? Usually it's overgrazing. We're always talking about that. But since the bison have been gone from the Great Plains, there are species of grasses on the Great Plains that are going extinct because they need that trampling, they need that grazing to stay alive. So that's an interesting ecological phenomenon that's happening that nobody really suspected would happen probably, but we're seeing that kind of thing happen. So how do I actually know when I walk into my garden if my soil is functioning? And I like to just do a test. And every few years I'll do this test. I've done it probably 5 times over like a decade. But I have a soil and it looks like it's doing pretty good, okay? So, and I don't use chemical fertilizers, but I will to do a soil test. And that's the only time I use it. I don't use it to grow a crop. But so if I have a garden that's doing, it's doing pretty good, I will take just some nitrogen fertilizer, and I just make a strip straight across the field with that fertilizer, and then I see if there's a plant response growth to the plants in that strip, and if they're growing more, and I can tell a difference than the other plants, then I know that my soil is not where it needs to be. Because with an absolute perfect functioning soil, you will see no difference where you put that fertilizer than where you didn't put it, okay? Now, if you continue to do that, it's going to get worse over time because your salt levels will come up, but that's a different speech. And then there's the pest and disease thing. If you have huge pest and disease outbreaks, that can be an indicator that our soils are not functioning. And old-time farmers, they hate this one because they're like, I'm working so hard, I love my farm so much, and I have my agricultural training, and we've done this for generations this way, and I always have healthy, beautiful crops, but I still have to fight pests. Well, we have to overcome our old thinking and realize what ecology is showing us. Because there's these myths about just farming that we still believe. We believe that soils are deficient in plant nutrients. They're not. In an inch of soil, pretty much dirt anywhere on the planet, maybe not the salt flats, there's a few exceptions, but pretty much we could grow food from those minerals for tens of thousands of years. We don't really know, but a long, long time. There's enough nutrients in an inch of soil to grow plants for almost forever. But what we are deficient in is the microbes that solubilize those elements into plant available forms. Okay, so that's the real deficiency. Another myth, microbes are not worth worrying about. I can't worry about a microbe. And a lot of people who have tried the regenerative agriculture type of thing, they buy these bugs in a can, and it says, we have tons of microbes in here, that we have 3 species in this bottle. You put this out on your land and it's going to work. And a lot of times people don't see a response to that. It's not really helping them in their journey. And I love to reiterate this point. 25,000 species is not multiple species in your field, in your environment. You need hundreds of thousands of species. So buying a microbe in a jug is not always, maybe it's a specific microbe to do a specific thing that could help a certain situation. But just to increase diversity, I don't think it's going to help that much. There's other things we need to be doing. So that's kind of mythology. Generally, that's mythology. Tillage is a good tool. It's way overused. It can be a good tool, but it's way overused. The one place I do like tillage is using a chisel that goes deep in the ground to break up hard pans, and at the same time you would inject a compost extract right behind the chisel. You have to just get your sprayers down in the soil so that you are putting those microbes in the soil as you go through. So we are inoculating the land with the proper microbes at the right time. I need to adjust soil pH. This is mythology. But we were all taught that. In every gardening book out there, every class we have taken, you've got to get your pH right. I've taught that most of my life. If your pH isn't right, all the nutrients can be there, but the plants can't take them up. That's what we're taught. We're finding in the latest research in the last decade, that's a myth. If we have the biology in the ground and we have a good diversity of crops on top, like at least 4 plant families growing at once. Not 4 different kinds of plants, but four plant families is kind of the key. 6 or 7's better, then that community dynamic makes it so that the plants they're able to absorb no matter what pH they're in. Now, if it's a pH of 12 or 1, it's not going to do it. But we don't have to worry about those little micro adjustments. And weeds are bad. Weeds are not bad. Weeds are an indicator. Weeds tell us a lot of really important things about what's happening. I can walk out into a field and see what weeds are growing, and without doing much more than just seeing which plants are growing, I know which microbes are missing from the system. Not always, but it's a good place to start. So let's properly define the deficiencies here. Soils are deficient in microbes. That's the truth. People are deficient in the proper knowledge, not because we're stupid, not because the universities told us the wrong thing. It's because the science and what we're learning is advancing so quick, we can't keep up with it. This is why we're deficient, so we just have to continue our education. Graduates are deficient in forgiveness. A lot of us get resentful, We didn't want to go to college in the first place. Dad said the only way you're going to get the farm is if you come home with your agricultural degree, and so we came home with resentments in the first place, and we carry that on as people like me get up here and start screaming and jumping up and down about this. But for us to be successful in our own systems, we've just got to forgive that past. Forgive the resentments. It wasn't the school's fault. It wasn't the science fault. We can't be blaming fault. We just need to realize, okay, here's where we are. We're just going to keep learning more. And then we move forward with that. 5 spheres within the soil. So this is just basic soil science stuff. But there's the detritus the agrotosphere, the porosphere, the rhizosphere, and the drillosphere. All right? Now I have a picture. I'm just going to move forward from this. And we'll look at this picture and we'll talk about these 5 spheres. So this is just a shovel full of soil I pulled up from a pasture in the ranch where I live. And the detritosphere, that is the dead plant organic matter that dies. If you have a grazer, a horse, a sheep, a goat, cattle, if they're eating, when they poop, that is the detritus. Okay, so all the plant matter, all that organic matter that dies and it goes on the surface of the soil, that's your detritosphere. Earthworms will take that down. That's the last one, that drillosphere. The earthworms will eat a bunch of that stuff on the surface. They take it down into the soil, so that's a good thing. But the detritosphere feeds the microbes, and your bacteria are the microbes that create the microaggregates, which is our agrotosphere, okay? So the microaggregates are made by the bacteria, and then the macroaggregates are pulled together by the fungus in the soil. And so they're macro because you can see them. When you dig up soil, you're holding it, and you can see all these little tiny balls in there, pieces of soil. Well, those are your macroaggregates that are pulled together. And when you get a lot of those aggregates, there are spaces between them, which is the porosphere, because you have all the pores. And so now with a good porosphere, we can get water and oxygen and root spaces and worms, everything. They can fit in all those porous spaces. Your Encotriids live down in there, and they're making that soil function. And then there's the rhizosphere. The rhizosphere is the second food source for all these microbes. Remember, our first food source is the detritosphere. The second food source is that rhizosphere. The roots are the plants, the leaves, they're collecting sunlight, they're making sugars, they're photosynthesizing. The exudates are going out, which is the plant sugars, they're going out of the roots into the soil. And the microbes are eating that. And there's some research going on. I don't know if this is fact or fiction or speculation. In the next 20 years, we'll know a lot more. But they say that there's a lot more exudates that go in the soil, just that liquid sunlight. It's sugars and carbohydrates. And they're going into that soil, but there's a lot more going in the soil than the plant mass, So like a cereal rye plant can have up to 380 miles of root on it, which is crazy craziest thing is the scientists who figured that out, but that's pretty awesome. Think about all that root mass, one cereal rye plant, and so there's all that mass, all that carbon, but when I think of that, I'm thinking of the tangible root that you can hold, you know. Most of that 380 miles is microscopic, but it's like a tangible part of the plant. Well, a lot more, 10 times, maybe 90 times more of what the plant puts in was liquid sugars. And what are those sugars doing? They're feeding those microbes. So we've got to have the living roots in the soil all the time to keep those high populations and high diversity of microbes alive. And of course the earthworms. Think of the continent with like the freeway systems and railroads moving stuff back and forth. That's kind of what the earthworms are doing. They're moving these microbes back and forth. You know, 2 feet in the soil is a long ways for a microbe. I don't know if they can go that far in their lifetime. Probably not. But on an earthworm they can. So they can travel around and we can get things inoculated. All right, so how do we actually create this functioning soil? And of course, everything I'm saying here, these are principles of soil health, and this is about vegetables. So everything I'm saying about is about vegetables here today, but it's all applicable to any soil, okay? So how do we create this functioning soil? And I just have these 6 things here that I live by. And the first one is we have to have the microbes. So here's a list of the microbes, and there's a couple of them. Enchytraeids and earthworms are not microbes. You can see them with the naked eye. But there they are in the soil, and those are the things that make the soil function. But they need those 6 things. They have to have oxygen. They have to have a good temperature. They have to have water and food and a home. If they don't have those things, then they're not going to live. So the most important thing on this list really is your personal adaptive management plan. You have to have a plan to know how to get your soil working and then keep it that way. You know, you could work for a decade and get a really good soil, and a plant manager or a farm manager, somebody comes in and says, we should till this up, and you could kill all your protozoa, all your fungus, all your beneficial nematodes, your enchytraeids, half your earthworms, and then what's going to eat all those dead bodies? It's going to be your bacteria, and now you're going to have, and then it goes out of balance, right? And so all the work you've done can go away pretty fast. So in our classroom, this is one of our students. This is the day that this girl saw a microarthropod for the first time. Look at the smile on this kid's face. So this is pretty awesome. But, we're teaching people how to see these things and what to see. I think we need to be teaching this stuff in kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, before kids lose interest in learning. It's some of the most important stuff. Why do we save this for masters and PhDs? I don't know. That's why we started an educational program on our ranch. But how many of you ever seen a cellulose in a microscope? They're pretty cool looking, you know. How many of you have seen humic acid? What does humic acid look like under a microscope? Do you have any idea? And how do you tell the difference between a humic acid, an oleic acid, and a fulvic acid? You know, it's the easiest thing in the world. It's the color of the aggregate. But if we don't know that, then we don't know, you know, and then we're like, oh man, all I want to do is pay the bills by growing this crop. But so getting these young people in here, it's so awesome to be able to do that because they're excited. They haven't got depressed yet, and they haven't had their midlife crises. So it's a good group to work with. Let's focus just on the vegetables for a minute. And these are pretty, you know, this could work for probably any crop, but just in the vegetables, I've got these 10 things that I do. These are kind of my rules to live by. I never till the garden again. Just don't do it, okay? Don't do it. Stop tilling. Yeah.
What about, I always throw all my crap in there.
Yeah. Like compost junk?
Yeah, it just sits there and
Yeah.
I have the urge to go mix it.
And you just want to till it in?
Can I just do the top?
There's a thing, we're going to talk about that. Here's the quick answer. The question was, you have a lot of detritus, junk, trash, kitchen waste, old whatever, and you just throw it on the garden and then you want to till it in. Well, everybody's, like Jimmy said, we're all recovering tillage addicts. But there's a thing called, what is it called? This is not in my notes. I think it's called griseoflavin, but it's the smell that we smell when we till the soil. And my wife's a psychologist, so she's told me this, because we don't hear this in agriculture. But like with drugs and stuff, she studies people who are on drugs. This is so not part of this presentation, but it's fun. But when you smell griseoflavin, it becomes addictive. So when Jimmy's talking, he's not kidding. He thinks he's kidding. I don't think he knows this. But how many of you have been on a big tractor with a 14-foot disc or a 20-footer? And you smell that soil, and it messes our brain up. How many of you know somebody who is a recovering person from, what is it called? What were those fancy drugs nowadays, like methamphetamines and stuff? It rewires our brain, and we have to have those things, right? I mean, people go through serious health issues. This is a real thing that people are researching right now. The smell of the griseoflavin, which comes from the actinobacteria that's in the ground, and we can smell that during rain. Why do we love the smell of rain so much? The same type of ecological processes are happening in the soil when we smell that, and we're like, oh, it's so good. Oh, yeah. We're getting some kind of a hit. I don't know if it's dopamine or what, but something's happening. And that had nothing to do with this, except to answer your question, we enjoy it because it makes us feel good. And is that bad? I don't know. It does stop the soil from functioning, and then we have to go bankrupt buying fertilizers, right? I plant new crops very quickly, and I have pictures of a lot of this stuff on this slide that I'll show you in a minute. But I will plant a crop, because I do almost all transplanting. I even transplant carrots, okay? There's a way to do that that's efficient and that works, and I'll show you pictures. But I will get the pots of transplants going, and I will plant them sometimes like maybe 2 or 3 days, usually a couple of weeks, sometimes 5 or 6 weeks before the other crop comes out. So that living root is always in the soil, and then you get your crops quicker and faster. And I do this in a greenhouse in a harsh climate. So this isn't just something you would do in Hawaii where things grow all the time, okay? Add earthworms. If you don't have 20 earthworms in every cubic feet of soil, just go out with your shovel, take it apart and count them. If you don't have them, I add them in. Now in cropping systems with hundreds of acres, or even if you're doing vegetables, like if you have a pivot of carrots or something, you may adjust some of this stuff a little bit. I don't think I would add earthworms to that. But I would certainly be feeding them so they grow naturally. But you need 20 earthworms per every cubic foot of soil. Test your soil microbes when you do soil tests. Don't test for plant nutrients. The soil testing that we do in agriculture today was invented in the 1940s and 50s. We're still doing the same things today. I know Dr. Haney has created new tests, and there's other things that are coming along in the regenerative agriculture movement, but for the most part, when we think soil test, especially in the gardening context, somebody just tests it and then they say, yeah, you're deficient in nitrogen, you better put a bag of fertilizer on there. That is not soil health, okay? But we can be testing for microbes. How do we do that? Remember that picture a minute ago of the girl looking through the microscope? We can see what they are right there, and we can know. And it's not that hard, and there's a lot of soil food web labs out there that are looking for clients. I'm one. So we can do that for people. Don't pile up your manure because it will start growing a lot of anaerobic stuff. And all of your plant diseases, all animal diseases, all human pathogens grow in anaerobic conditions. I say all. A pathologist would freak out right now. We should never say all, right? But almost all of them, they're anaerobic conditions, which means no oxygen or very low oxygen. So if you can keep things aerobic and you keep the oxygen going, your critters, the microbes in there, they will outcompete all the pests. That's one reason why we don't have as much pests and disease in a really good functioning soil, is because it's an aerobic soil, and those the disease-causing fungus and other stuff, it just doesn't grow in those conditions. So that's pretty cool. Don't pile up your manure, compost it. We just talked about that. Rotate roots. Okay, rotate your roots, not your crops. I think it's mythology that we're so worried about crop rotation. In a world of non-functioning soil, you better rotate crops or you will have disease. But in functioning soils, I know I have gardening friends around the world, and they've been testing plots with things like potatoes and green beans, things that can get diseases pretty easy if you don't rotate. And they're on year 15, 16, 17, same year every year. No disease, no rotation, because their soil is functioning well, and the anaerobic microbes, which cause the disease, don't live in that kind of soil. Just plant it with a pointed stick. I've got pictures of what I'm talking about. If you're doing 2 acres or less, you don't hardly need any fancy equipment. If you're up to maybe, you could probably do 5, 8 acres with a paper pot transplanting system. Yes? Uh-huh.
If I put a seed in it, it's not going to grow. It's too complicated.
Yeah, we'll talk about. I have pictures to show that. Yeah, we want to minimize our monocrops, maximize the diversity, okay, of plants. That will maximize the diversity of microbes. If you're always growing 1 or 2 species, you're going to have a low microbe count. And so the more species you can grow and in the same place, it's going to be a good thing. Okay. Save and breed your own seeds. And in big fields, anything over like 5 or 6 acres, you're probably not going to want to be using lots of compost. See, in number 1 where I say never till, we're adding compost on top of the soil. So instead of adding that compost, you're going to want to be using a cover crop system like they're talking in all of their classes today that you'd be using. So you'd be raising like cereal rye and daikon radishes and stuff, and then you just roll those down with a roller crimper, and it terminates that crop, and then you can go in and you can plant your vegetables in that. Can that be done? Yes, because I've been doing it. But there's not very many people showing that. We need more people doing vegetable systems and practicing and figuring out what works and what doesn't work in this. Just really quickly, let's talk about nitrogen, because nitrogen is the one thing that all soils, they say, they are deficient in. It's not true, but it kind of is true. It's not true in a functioning soil. It is true in most agricultural soils, which are not functioning very well. But let's just look at this real quick. If you look up there where it says most leachable forms of nitrogen, there's 4 forms of nitrogen. Those are all man-made things. You buy them in a bag, or the semi-truck brings it out to your ranch, and you spread that out, okay? So those are very leachable. Leachable means the nutrients go away when it rains. The water takes it away, and then your plants don't get it. The least leachable forms of nitrogen are the microbes, the living microbes and the dead microbes. Bacteria are NO3, which is nitrate. Okay? So nitrate is bacteria. All of the other super beneficial groups are ammonia. I said that wrong. Ammonium, big difference. But forms of nitrogen, okay? So your fungus, protozoa, nematodes, microarthropods, those are all ammonium. Now, here's why this matters. Look at the very bottom of the page. Weed food is nitrate. Vegetable food is ammonium. So if you have a really gorgeous functioning soil, you will have very few weed seeds. And I don't care how many weeds blow in from your neighbors. We're talking about things like red root amaranth, lamb's quarters, all those horrible weeds that come up and they get this tall and they smother everything out. They will not germinate if there's lots of ammonium in the soil. Okay? So with these living microbes, and they live and die every day, their life cycles are very short, then you're going to have those high concentrations of ammonium. Ecologically speaking, the nature thinks that your soil is in a mid-succession, which is where most vegetables want to live ecologically, is between a forest and the rocks. that are formed from the volcano, okay? So we're talking like something like a grassland, and that's where vegetables want to grow. And the weeds will not be growing there. So we just mimic Mother Nature and we stop picking weeds. How would that be in a vegetable system? It sounds too good to be true. I must be a liar. I'm not. This is working. It's just that we are deficient in the right knowledge of how to actually do it. I already mentioned the carrots and potatoes. A good functioning soil, you can just pull them right out of the ground. It may take 5 to 10 years to get to that point where you don't need a digger, but it can be done. Obviously, if you have a 200-acre irrigated pivot of potatoes, you're not going to be pulling them by hand. So context matters. That's why context is part of the soil health. It's why it's one of the principles. So how do I fix my garden? Just look at the answers over there, and every one of those answers is the same for every problem. Okay? But throughout my whole life, because I've been teaching forever about this gardening stuff, but I always hear people say, my soil's too sandy, I can't grow crops. I have too much clay, I can't grow crops. My soil is compacted, I can't grow crops. I have too many pests and disease, I can't grow crops. For every reason that you come up with that you can't grow crops, my answer is add 3 inches of compost, put your transplants in and water it and stop complaining, and it's going to be beautiful. Can it be that simple? Yes, it can be. And then people always say, no, that's not true, it can't be, there's no way, because what about quackgrass and morning glory? Because those will take over everything. We all know that, right? So that's where you use cardboard. Go get you some giant sheets of cardboard from an appliance store or wherever. Put it on the ground, and if you're talking about those really bad weeds of the quackgrass, morning glory, there's probably 10 others in the world that are just as bad. Put 2 or 3 layers of the cardboard on top of it. You don't till it. You don't spray it. You just put that cardboard on top of it, add 4 or 5 inches of compost on there, put your transplants in, water it, and the cardboard will terminate those perennial crops. Once in a while, that doesn't work as good as I'm making it sound, okay? If you do have a problem and it comes up en masse and it's not working, then you're going to have to sacrifice your crop for 12 months, cover your entire land. We're talking gardens, so this could be done because most gardens aren't acres and acres. But cover it with a silage tarp. Weight it down so the wind can't blow it away. Keep it completely dark and covered for 12 months. It will eradicate all those weeds, okay? I've done these methods and they work. Okay, so let's just talk about ecology for a minute. What is the role of a pest? A pest in ecology, it's the cleanup crew of an unnatural phenomenon in nature. A 300-acre field of soybeans is an unnatural ecological phenomenon. Mother Nature does not know what to do with that. She will bring in pests to try to clean that up. And that's the problem with monocrops. Mother Nature does not know that monocrops are supposed to be there. All right? Disease, it's the same thing. It's the cleanup crew of the Rhizosphere. There's this unnatural balance of way too many things to be decomposed, and so diseases come in to decompose. Let's stop looking at pests and disease as pests and disease, and let's look at them as ecological tools. But if we're trying to grow a crop because we have to pay our bills, is this helpful? So that can be argued. But the principles are true. We just have to start managing correctly. So what is the ecological role of a weed? A weed is an indicator. It will tell us all kinds of things about our soil without doing expensive soil tests if we know what the species are that are growing there, because they'll be growing and thriving and they're doing their thing. Ecologically speaking, they want to cover the ground. They want to get the ground covered. The only time that doesn't happen in nature that I have found from everything I've studied is when it has gone past the point of no return and your ecology is actually desertifying, becoming desert. And then the only tool that's really effective to turn it around and bring it back to a grassland is the bovine. You've got to have a cow out there. You need a lot of manure on the ground. How do we mimic that? In other words, how do we turn the Sahara into a beautiful vegetable field? We don't have to put down cardboard because there's nothing growing. So we add 4 or 5, 3, whatever inches of really good compost. We put our plants in there. The living roots are going down in. We keep some water on there so the plants will grow. The microbes get established, and we have turned the dunes into something green. Okay? So this works. What else? Taproots. Taproots are awesome. Things like, well, you tell me, what is a taproot in the vegetable world? A carrot. What's another one? It's longer than a carrot. A parsnip. What's another one nobody's ever heard of? Amen. Is that a vegetable? That's right. What's another one? Yes, I said that in the last one and nobody had ever heard of it. Good job. One more. Radish, the daikon. They're a very huge taproot, right? Everybody else is talking about daikons probably today. The beet, yeah. Do we think of a beet as a taproot? There's like this round little vegetable, right? Because we're educated by the grocery store, but if you're growing them and you pull them out, they have a root that goes down a long ways. Very good. What about Scruzanera? It's like the oyster plant. It's like salsify. It's similar. It's a cousin. So anyway, carbon, are we getting the carbon in the soil with all of these roots? Because that's what the fibrous roots do ecologically. I already mentioned the cereal rye plant putting out 380 miles of roots. How can one little grass plant do that? So in the soil health world, in the regenerative ag world, there's either 5 or 6 principles. If you learned this 7 or 8 years ago, there were 5 principles of soil health. They recently added context, which is good because vegetable context is very different than a cattle context, which is different than a sheep operation or row crops. So context matters, but the principles can still be very similar. I'm a rebel, so I added a 7th one, and I put it in the number 1 place, which I call mindfulness. Here again, I learned that from my wife with her psychology training. We need to focus. We need to have laser focus in our lives on what we're committed to. We need to have commitment. We need to have persistence when things get hard and we hit a brick wall and we're like, oh man, that roadblock is too big to get over. I'm gonna do something else for a career. We have to keep going in the things we're called to do and overcome these things. And that's what mindfulness is. We don't get stressed out, and we don't worry about the future. We don't worry about the past. Here we are right now. I'm just going to be mindful, and I'm going to do what I know is right now, making the right decision now. I don't have to solve next week's problems right now. That's mindfulness. So it's a human element of this, but all of management is done by humans, so I think this is very important. We should have that in there. So I'm going to fly through these pictures really quick. This is like a movie, so watch the screen. This is May of 2020. I was working in Salt Lake City as a medical massage therapist, and I wear a lot of career hats. And then COVID shuts everything down, and it's hard to, socially distance as a massage therapist. So I lost my job and my business and everything, and so it's just like done. And Jared Sorensen called me and said, hey, remember that greenhouse we talked about 15 years ago? I want to build one because I can't buy vegetables at the grocery store. The grocery stores are empty. Maybe we ought to grow our own food. And so this is the first day I saw the place where we built the greenhouse. That's me and my daughter. This is 2 months later. We broke ground this day, and that's Jared showing me how to run his cute little bulldozer. So I scraped the topsoil off, and we made a big pile of topsoil. And then we dug it down about 10 feet deep, and then we brought boulders in. And this wall is 134 feet long, and I made it 10 feet tall. And then I was too cheap to rent or purchase a transit, so I took a rifle scope off one of my rifles and duct taped it to a tripod and put a little tiny level on it, and I shot level lines with it, which was a fun day. And then we got the frame put up for this greenhouse, and Heavenly Father really liked it because look at that rainbow he sent us, so we felt like we were doing the right thing, so that was fun. And then we have a tiller here. Can you imagine after all this, I've got a tiller. So here again, the principle of context, but so at this point, I just want to point something out. This was 4 months of bulldozer and backhoe, moving dirt, and moving, I don't know how many tons, hundreds of tons of stones those are, but those are some serious boulders that we brought in. And where were we driving every single time we did anything? On our vegetable garden. This is insane. Nobody would take a construction site like that and decide to grow a vegetable garden in it, right? So we took the tiller in there, we tilled it up a little bit, mostly so we could just get things smooth because it was just a bumpy mess of a construction zone. And then we started framing in this wall here. And you can see the tree is green there because it was August and we were going up. And then by the time the tree, I think this was probably October, the tree was turning. And we got the wall rocked in. But see, I wanted to make sure I'd never till it again. So we made a fortress that I couldn't get into with the tiller. And we made the door beautiful by putting this light in it. And then you can see in here we've got the ground ready. So the ground's all leveled and prepped and ready to go. And then we got the covering on. This is a temporary covering. Don't ever put plastic on straight-walled greenhouses. It's good on bowed greenhouses. But this is made for a rigid covering. And eventually when we save enough pennies, we're going to put a rigid covering on it. But here we are finishing that up. And in this picture, I want to point out the vents because the number one problem I see with greenhouses is people don't vent them and they burn up in the summertime. But above the stone wall there, you can see that vent. It opens 6 feet wide, and it's the full 134 feet of the greenhouse so that vents. And then on the opposite side, you can see the 3-foot sidewall that we have there. So that rolls up too. And in the summer when it got hot, it worked really well because it would heat up in there. And when there was absolutely no wind outside, you could stand right there and you could feel the heat coming out. It felt like the wind was blowing because it would be heating up in there, but the draft was just coming through. And my thermometers told me that the hottest it ever got in there was only 8 degrees warmer than it was outside. So it worked very good. And then the tool shelf is good because if you ever have people working with you or for you, especially if you're paying labor, you don't want them walking around looking for stuff. So we just keep things super organized. And we installed the stone floor. And then on the inside, this is one of our main classrooms on the farm where we bring people into the greenhouse and we're talking to them, teaching them all of these soil health principles and regenerative agriculture and vegetable production. When people are done with our course, they can go home and do all the production they need on their own farms or work for somebody. But I want to point something out in the background on the garden portion of this. You can see the silage tarp. We turned on a sprinkler and it got this super saturated and wet. It was on for about 5-6 hours. And then I covered the tarp on there. And what that did is all the weed seeds germinated. And I left the tarp on there for a long time. So they all just died because they never got any light. And so when we went ahead and started planting and harvesting in there, we had a very, very small weed problem to deal with to start out. So that was a good idea that we did. A lot of things weren't such a good idea, and there's a lot of learning curve to learn all this, but that was a good one. The stone wall is always a hit. People always like to climb up there. You bring them in to see what we're doing with the vegetables, and they don't care. They climb on the stones. But the real reason this is here, look between the rocks, and you can see the green growing in there. We're growing between the boulders everywhere in here. So part of the mindfulness thing and having laser focus on what you're doing, I use cardboard for a lot of stuff. The two big things are if I do start carrots from seed, which is what I'm doing in this picture, I'll get the ground nice and wet, we plant the seed, and then we put the cardboard on top of it to keep it wet, because the number one reason carrots won't germinate is they dry out during germination. Because they've actually started germination, but you don't really see it, and then they dry out. So I use cardboard for that. They don't need sunlight until they come up. So I wait about 5 or 6 days, and then I start looking under it every day. As soon as I see them sprouting, the cardboard's gone. So this picture shows the air vents working in the middle of the summer, And you can see both vents are opened up about, well, more than halfway, but they're open. But look behind me in that picture and you will see that there's some tall growing plants in that. So that's one of the mistakes I made. It didn't really cause us a problem. Like I said, it was only 8 degrees warmer in here than it was outside. But the neat thing was I recognized that the airflow coming in could very well be stopped with plant growth there. And so what we changed is you can see behind me now, that whole thing, we just put it to strawberries. So now it's a very low growing plant so that the air is not restricted, so the air can flow all the time. Yes?
So you compacted the soil, you filled the soil.
Yeah.
So how did the plants start to grow?
Okay, so that's the perfect question for this slide, because what I'm looking at in this slide, I'm looking at a cover crop. This is the same kind of cover crop that Jimmy Emmons or anybody else is going to grow outside on their thousands of acres. This is a mix of cereal rye, Daikon radish, and hairy vetch. Okay, and we could have put in some other things, but I had that seed and so I just planted it, whatever. So I planted those in there. Those daikons are going to grow deep and break up hard pans. The cereal rye is putting an amazing amount of carbon in the soil, and the hairy vetch is a legume to help fix some nitrogen. But a lot of times, like in the gardening books and in the world of nitrogen fixing, people get way out of hand about it. Carbon is the key, it's not the nitrogen. If you have enough carbon in your soil, forget nitrogen fixing legumes. Okay, and I mean, I can show you, I have a library full of gardening books at my house, and they are screaming, nitrogen fixing legumes are everything. This is where we have to forgive our educations and move forward, because carbon is the key, not the nitrogen fixing. Daikon radish, hairy vetch, and cereal rye. Don't get confused about me saying rye. There's a lot of different grasses called rye. Make sure this is grain, cereal rye. You don't want a perennial ryegrass, because that's what people put in their lawns and it won't die. You want this stuff to die. Of course, we can kill it with cardboard and compost, so it's not that big a deal, but that's not the purpose of what we were doing here. This is a picture of my Penetrometer. These are just a pretty cool tool that you can push in the ground to test. I like this because we can know what our compaction levels are and how deep the compaction levels are. And you just stick it in the ground and then it reads on there. Because plant roots will not go through 300 psi compaction. I think it's Purdue University, it could be somebody else, but they've done a lot of research on that, showing that there is no living species of plant that will go through 300 psi. Now, and so I'm telling you this, next year we will find a species that does, and so this will be false information. But it's a good thing to think about. Now, half of that is 150 psi. And at 150 psi, most plants won't go through that. Daikon radishes will punch through a 150, okay, which is pretty awesome because that opens it up so everything else can get down in there. So here's a picture of this cover crop. So you can see on the right side, there's the entire row of, that's what I call bed number 2 in this greenhouse. And it's filled with these 3 species. And you can see the cereal rye there and the daikon. I was going to put a tape measure by that, and then I forgot. But it's about, I think it's about 10 inches long, somewhere in that. But this species, these daikons, they can get like 2 feet long, like great big round giant things. So you have to plant them at the right time of year and, grow them out. But I always plant these pretty late, and so they don't grow very long, and then they go dormant. If they're outside, the frost will kill them, and that'll terminate them. But then there's, however big the root got, then there's these big shafts going in the ground, so that nutrients, sunlight, oxygen, all that stuff can get in there. Look at the Rhizome Sheath on this. Does everybody know what a Rhizome Sheath is? It's the dirt that's stuck to the roots. When I went to horticulture school, they taught us that the Rhizome Sheath on plants is on the plant roots. That was bad. Something's wrong, man. It's going to get a fungus. A healthy root should be white and clean. That's what they taught us. That's false information nowadays, because now we know what a Rhizome Sheath is and what it does. The other picture there where the root is nice and clean, that's showing the nodules on there. I had to clean it off. I stuck that in and swished it around. But the nitrogen fixing nodules are on there. But is this one fixing nitrogen? No, it's not. And the way you know is you break those nodules open. You see the little root, the little white balls? That's what I'm talking about that's on those roots. That's what the nodule is. When you smash those, it should look like blood. It should be blood red. When they are blood red, they're fixing nitrogen. Okay? If they're just clear or pink, they're not doing much. So what should I have done when I planted this seed to make it fix nitrogen? I should have inoculated the seed with Rhizobium, okay, the inoculant that would work with this plant. So this one is showing the cover crop. That's that same row, and I terminated the cover crop. No, the cardboard there, I just peeled it back for the purposes of taking this picture for the demonstration here today. So you can see the cover crop on that corner. It's turning yellow, and it's starting to die. And then you can see the broccoli plants that I put in the compost. So that's how you do that. Yeah.
So you terminate this by cardboard?
That's it, yeah. We don't till it, we don't cut it down, we don't do anything. We just put the compost right on. And it could be this tall. Put the compost on there and walk around on it. We feel like, oh, it'd be bad to walk. Don't never walk on your garden beds, right? I walk on them all the time with functioning soils. It doesn't really compact them. Yeah.
What happens if you did cut it and then just left it and then?
You can, yeah. If that's easier, go for it. Sure. Yeah. You could cut it off and take it and make a compost if you needed the biomass. You could do that.
So that's carbon too, isn't it?
Yeah.
This one,
Yeah. But you've already put tons of carbon in there with all the exudates. And you're going to add on 3 inches of compost. So, there's not really a carbon deficiency in a vegetable system unless maybe you're doing hundreds of acres or something. But like for a context of most vegetables where we're talking about less than an acre for, a market garden or something, this works really well. Go ahead in the back.
Does the, since you found broccoli,
Yeah.
does it go through cardboard and
Yeah.
already?
Yeah, that is a good question because sometimes they won't, but sometimes they will. Sometimes when I stick the hole in there to make the hole, I'll stick a hole through the cardboard. But if you have quackgrass or morning glory, they'll find that hole and there'll be a weed problem. So no holes in the cardboard if you have a really bad weed. Okay? What's that? I make my compost. If you get compost from a municipality, you will bring in disease and anaerobic problems and all kinds of stuff, which makes this a little bit harder. You do have to manufacture your own compost, but one compost pile that's like 4 feet high and 3 feet across, because I just make a little wire thing to make them in, it will have enough extract in it to inoculate 400 acres. Okay? It's not enough compost to put 4 inches on, but to make an extract, and then you're putting that in the ground. So it can go a long ways depending on how you use it. All right, here I am with a pom-pom lettuce and my 28-pound cabbage that we grew in there. There's my daughter with beautiful cauliflower that we grew in there. Here's our boot camp that we did. We do a lot of educational stuff, like I already told you. But these people came for 3 days, and we do a Feed Your Family boot camp. We teach them everything they need to know. We're having one next month. This was that same boot camp. So this is my lawn in my yard, and I just wanted to show people how easy this was. So this took us 30 minutes. We did have a tractor with a bucket with compost in it, so that sped things up. But we put a layer of compost on the grass. We didn't have any bad weeds that would come through. It was just grass and dandelions and random things you have in a lawn. And then we put that on there, and then 90 days later, that's what it looked like. Okay? So it was pretty awesome, and I weeded it once, and I probably didn't need to. But yeah, there's some compost. This has lots of wood chips in it so I can grow more fungus. If you need lots of carbon to feed lots of woody stuff, to grow fungus. If you just have green materials, it grows more bacteria, but we need lots of fungus in the soils. Here's my worm bin, that plywood thing. That's my worm bin I grew inside the greenhouse. I built, I didn't grow it. But there's my worms. I love those guys. They're the best thing in the world. Those guys will work for you for free forever. Here's the living roots in the soil. So there's a bean plant, and you can see the beans that are ready to pick. That's the first picking. They're still white flowers on there that are blooming and growing. And then you can see out in front of that, you can see the Daikon Radishes that are already growing because I planted those a week and a half ago. Okay, so there they are. They're growing, they're blooming, or well, not blooming, but they're starting to thrive. So when I did the last picking of green beans off of this, those Daikon radishes were like 14 inches high, the same height as the green beans, and I never took the green bean plant out. It just dried up after a while. And so farming this way can be ugly. So the aesthetics of beautiful rows and everything's just right, that's not really how I do it. See, here's a couple of rows that are mixed up. That kale on the right side is it's 14 months old. And look down on the compost down deep, and you will see the brand new kale that's growing there that I just transplanted in there. And then here's carrots that I have transplanted into paper pots. I just roll up like a soup can. You just roll paper around it, make a little pot, and then I fill it with pure worm castings. That's the best potting soil in the world. And then I put 5 or 6 carrot seeds in each one. Don't thin those because they will just grow in a little clump. And 5 or 6 seeds is not too much. They will still be nice, really nice carrots. The lettuce is there in between them because that lettuce will grow up and it'll be like super beautiful. And then we will pick that about the time that the carrots are in the stage when they need a little more room. And so we just thin those out and then the carrots can take off. If something is getting crowded, like if this lettuce started crowding out those carrots, I'd just pick it earlier. It's no big deal, you know. And then in November, this was strawberries ripening, but right in front of my hand there, you can see the little hole in the ground. That's because I plant garlic as a companion plant with these guys. While the one's dormant, the other ones are growing. And here's my system of how I do it. So these are 2 systems. One is the paper pot system with a cordless drill and an auger. Don't use a cheap drill. You need a good high quality drill and a powerful one, or you'll burn up a cheap one is what I'm saying. Because I'm doing like an acre outside, drilling all these holes. The other system there is just the 200 cell tray with the dibble that I stick down in to plant in. And I sift the soil because I don't want chunks in it, so that's the worm castings that get sifted. And then I plant a tray every once a month. 12 months a year, I'll plant a tray, and this is just what we eat. We're about 30 people in our little community that we're eating from. And we grow them in this little greenhouse, and that greenhouse is the only thing that has a heater in it. The rest of it's just a solar greenhouse with the big, massive rock wall keeping things from freezing. I water it with a simple watering can. And here's more diversity. This is me planting broccoli where the lettuce is. This lettuce has been cut 4 times. The next time I cut it, it will be terminated. But if you look close, you can see there's like 10 broccoli plants in there already, and they're going to grow there for about 2 weeks. And then we cut the lettuce out with my pocket knife. I just cut it off, and then there's the broccoli already established. We do the same thing with potted plants. These are fig trees that are dormant because it's winter, and the plants are lettuce and garlic is growing in there. So this is me thinking, I need a place to put 2,000 paper pots. I need tables and all this stuff. We had all this wasted space up above the stone wall, so I snapped my fingers one night, and the next morning there's a table up there. So that was pretty awesome. So now we have a place for that, so using the wasted space. But look at the diversity in here. This does not look like a traditional garden. It's not pretty. It's not nice and neat. Right now it looks okay, but in 3 weeks from now, half of that stuff is drying up and going to seed, and it's weird, But when you walk in there, you hear bumblebees and honeybees and hummingbirds. It's a pretty diverse place, and it's super healthy. How much time we got? Are we out of time?
I'll give you a couple more minutes just to
Okay. This is my good friend Joseph Lofthouse. He's probably one of the best plant breeders in the world. He's a pretty educated guy, but you don't really see that so much when you hear him speak. He's this super brilliant plant breeder, but he doesn't come at it from a scientific approach. He comes at it from the approach of the illiterate people who were breeding plants 8,000 years ago. And he's right in what he says. There's 4 things you need to know to breed the best plants ever. Plants make seeds. Offspring resembles its parents and grandparents. Sometimes a trait will skip a generation, and simply select and save the seeds from the things that taste good. So let me show you these pictures. So we're just selecting these things. We call them landrace, but here's, we've got the celery and the strawberry, and these are growing in freezing weather and ripening and doing well, freezing and thawing every day. But we're selecting these varieties to be able to grow in conditions where they normally wouldn't. How many of you would buy a cantaloupe that's the size of a baseball? Nobody wants that. But when you taste this, and with the fact that it ripened in our 80-day growing season, this is a jewel. This is beautiful. Excellent flavors. How many of you seen a butternut squash that looks like that? I can't fit a tennis ball inside that seed cavity. Most of that is meat that we eat. So this is what we're accomplishing with the plant breeding projects. And of course, we're looking for lettuce varieties here that will do good in the summertime. The one in my right hand, the green one, it just went to seed. So that's not one we're growing in the summer. And the red romaine, it did really well. This was a no-weed garden. This was just clay soil. We put up the greenhouse, and I put 1 foot of old rotten hay in there. And then we planted transplants in there. That's what it looked like later on in the year. I'm looking at a cantaloupe to see if it's ripe right there. I pulled 7 weeds out of this whole greenhouse through the whole growing season. Weeds are an indicator of things that are happening in ecology that are not something to fight. Okay? Here's our student housing. How would you like to be 18 years old again and come back to the... spend a summer on our ranch learning all this stuff? Here's another classroom shot of making roots grow on branches, which we have great success at. And then here's more pictures of our students, some of them. And here's me and my wife and Jared and his wife, but we're the ones who teach these classes. It's pretty fun. We're out of time, but I guess we can take a question. It's up to you.
I mean, I think it's just I come back out in the hall, so
So I got lots of time. If you want to look at another slide, I'll go back to it. If you have questions, let's talk. Oh, say that again, sorry. No, I don't even know what it is. Uh-huh. So it's like those little metal things and you make your own soil. I've never done that, but I think it's cool.